Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Voldemort really did have a daughter. Her name was Delphi, and many people don't even know she exists because she only appears in The Cursed Child, the sequel play set after the epilogue of the 7th book. In this sort of official fanfic, there was room for several curious new characters, but the strangest and most controversial one was Voldemort's daughter. She's the catalyst for the story's main conflict, but her whole backstory is riddled with logical inconsistencies. Today, let's talk about them together. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Delphi and her allure. To trick Amos Diggory, Delphi used magic to convince the old man she was his niece. No questions there, but what about everyone else? A couple of shy-sounding lines, and Albus and Scorpius instantly trusted her. A logical question arises: where did she get such talent for manipulation? Voldemort honed his skill over years, first in the orphanage, then at Hogwarts, then in the wizarding world. But where did Delphi learn? Or is the art of persuasion something you inherit genetically? Number 2, why is Delphi the only child? Even if we accept that the Dark Lord suddenly decided to have an heir, why just one? History is full of dynasties where kings and emperors tried to have multiple children to ensure their line survived. Voldemort was obsessed with making Horcruxes, 7, just in case. But when it came to children, he had the energy and will for exactly one. That sounds odd for such a calculating, pragmatic, dark wizard. Number 3, what were Voldemort's plans for her? Let's be honest. Do you seriously think Voldemort, obsessed with blood purity and immortality, was ever sitting around in the evening thinking, I love Bellatrix, let her have my baby? More likely, if he even considered having a child, it was purely for his own goals. But what were those goals? Did he see her as an heir? That would mean he believed, even a little, in the possibility of his defeat, which runs counter to his character. Did he want to make her a servant? He already had plenty of those. Maybe he planned to raise an equal, skilled in the dark arts. It's all speculation. Number 4, what were Delphi's own plans? Delphi longed to meet her father and wanted to prove she was worthy of his attention. But what then? Let's assume her plan worked and she saved him. What kind of relationship did she imagine? Dreamed of being his right hand? Or hoped Voldemort would accept her with love and pride? And if he wanted something else, was she ready to fight him for power? Sadly, the Cursed Child leaves these questions unanswered. Number 5, why did she choose amnesia? The ending of the play is strange. Delphi fails. Harry and his friends stop her from changing the past. She wanted to prevent Voldemort from meeting baby Harry and save his life. After her failure, she begs them to either kill her or wipe her memory. Why such an extreme choice? Was her emotional attachment to a father she never knew really that strong? Why did she surrender so quickly? Even escaping Azkaban is possible, though hard. She could have continued the Dark Lord's mission. Number 6. Was there a Hogwarts letter? The books and films barely touch this question, but in one of Hogwarts' towers there's a quill and a dragon hide-bound book. When a child with enough magical potential is born, the quill records their name in the book. When they turn 11, they get a letter. It's a flawless system. Logically, Delphi's name should have appeared there too. Then a whole mess of questions arises. Did she get the letter? If yes, why didn't she go? If no, why did that ancient magic ignore her? Number 7. How did she sneak into the school? When Albus and Scorpius first travelled to the past, things went horribly wrong. They didn't save Cedric. They just made everything worse. Ron and Hermione never married. Their kids were never born. Albus was sorted into Gryffindor, and their friendship fell apart. To reach them, Albus wrote Delphi a letter, and what happened? She just up and walked into Hogwarts. Even Delphi herself noted it was far too easy. If a random outsider girl could bypass all the school's protective enchantments so easily, then Hogwarts' security is seriously questionable. Number 8. Who raised her? Delphi was raised by Euphemia Rowley, a name barely whispered even among Voldemort's followers. No Bellatrix, no Malfoy, not even a Carrow, just Raoul. In The Half-Blood Prince, Death Eaters plotted in the Malfoy drawing room, the elite of Voldemort's army side by side. If the Dark Lord had truly intended Delphi to inherit his power, why entrust her to someone so obscure? Why not leave her with someone like Narcissa Malfoy, who once lied to Voldemort himself to protect her son? That kind of cunning would have shaped Delphi into a real leader. Instead, she was hidden away by a single, uninspiring caretaker. Even stranger is how the other Death Eaters never knew about her. After Voldemort's fall, they scattered but remained connected enough to recognize one of their own. Bellatrix Lestrange was famous for her devotion, yet Delphi grew up a ghost, her existence a secret even among fanatics who'd once carved the dark mark into their skin. She wasn't taught the traditions, the alliances, the strategies of the old circle. Euphemia Rowley raised her in the shadows, but for what purpose? Preparing her for greatness would have meant training her in the politics of fear and loyalty. Instead, Delphi emerged into the world alone, untested, and shockingly naive about the legacy she claimed to carry. Number 9. Why didn't she find other Death Eaters? Delphi spent her life dreaming of Voldemort's return, yet she never reached out to the old guard who once worshipped him. The Malfoy family survived the war intact, their name still powerful in wizarding society. Even if Lucius was finished with the Dark Lord, someone like Theodore Nott or Walden McNair might have been tempted by the promise of restoring the old order. In the Deathly Hallows, Voldemort called them all to the Forbidden Forest, and they came. "My Death Eaters," he hissed, and dozens appeared from the shadows. Delphi never tried to find these men or remind them of their oath. She simply decided she was enough. Her plan depended on tricking teenagers instead of building an army. She never even approached the Carrows who taught dark arts at Hogwarts, or Travers, who killed for Voldemort without hesitation. It would have taken one discreet meeting in Nocturne Alley to gather supporters, or one message sent by Owl to the remnants of the old network. But Delphi ignored every obvious ally. She believed she could change history alone, as if raw ambition mattered more than strategy. For a woman who inherited the Dark Lord's dreams, she showed none of his skill for recruitment. Number 10. Where did she get such powerful magic? Delphi could fly without a broom, a feat so rare it was used to show Voldemort's terrifying power in the Deathly Hallows. Voldemort was flying like smoke on the wind. Even Severus Snape, the most accomplished dark wizard, after Voldemort himself, used this technique. It wasn't something they taught at Hogwarts. It wasn't in any standard textbook. Yet Delphi performs it naturally, as if dark flight were a family heirloom. No one ever says who taught her. No lessons are shown. She just does it, as if raw bloodline alone replaced years of brutal training. Magic in this world has rules. Hermione spent hours mastering simple charms. Harry had to practice Expelliarmus until it was instinct. Even Voldemort himself learned from books, teachers, and experimentation. Delphi, raised by Euphemia Rowley, a minor Death Eater with no claim to brilliance, somehow developed techniques that frightened auras. She had no Hogwarts education, no dueling club, no mentorship from the likes of Bellatrix or Snape. Yet she cast advanced spells with ease, a prodigy whose power seems less the result of work and more the result of convenient storytelling. Number 11. How did she know about the Time Turners? Time Turners were not casual toys. After the Order of the Phoenix, the entire stock was destroyed during the battle in the Department of Mysteries. The Ministry declared them forbidden. Hermione Granger once explained to Harry, awful things happen to wizards who meddle with time. Even she, the brightest witch of her age, was forced to return hers under strict supervision. Yet Delphi, raised in isolation by Euphemia Roll, somehow knew not only that a prototype survived, but exactly where the Ministry kept it. Imagine the archives under tight Ministry protection, rows of locked cabinets guarded by spells and auras trained to spot dark magic sympathizers. Hermione as minister would have demanded the highest security. In The Cursed Child, it's revealed that the Time Turner was hidden away for good reason. No sane government would leave such a weapon unguarded. But Delphi knew she had blueprints in her mind. She crafted a plan that involved not just stealing it, but using it with surgical precision. A secret even the Death Eaters never learned fell into her lap without any clear explanation. How did she learn the passwords? Who told her about the vault? Was there a traitor in the Ministry, like Pious Thickness once was? Or did she read about it in the Daily Prophet's classifieds? The script never says. It expects the audience to believe a hidden child, far from any official channels, understood the most sensitive secrets of wizarding Britain. That breach of logic breaks the illusion of her cunning and makes her scheme feel like sloppy convenience instead of genuine threat. Number 12. Why didn't the Ministry notice her activity? Hermione Granger sat behind the minister's desk with stacks of parchment, a woman who once brewed Polyjuice potion at 12 and spotted every lie in Dolores Umbridge's regime. She had fought 2 wars and memorized every dark spell they had ever faced. Yet Delphi's entire conspiracy bloomed under her watch. No whispers reached her ears, no informant sounded an alarm. In the Deathly Hallows, Hermione snapped, "We need to plan, Harry, we need to be careful." She was the one who always saw the trap before they fell into it. How did she miss a witch determined to rewrite history itself? Delphi didn't act like a hidden recluse. She approached Amos Diggory at St. Oswald's, she plotted with Albus Potter and lured him into stealing the Time Turner. She even sent an owl to Hogwarts, and this wasn't subtle. Ministry security was supposed to be unbreakable after the war, with auras trained to notice even a whiff of forbidden magic. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who knew how to catch Death Eaters, helped rebuild the department. Harry Potter himself was head of magical law enforcement. Their offices had dealt with Death Eater remnants, with dark artifacts, with everything Delphi tried to use, and yet not one of them noticed the granddaughter of Bellatrix Lestrange preparing to alter the past. It strains belief. Delphi wasn't polyjuiced or hidden behind powerful Fidelius charms. She was a woman with the dark mark in her bloodline and a clear motive. Imagine Hermione standing in her office, reviewing reports of strange magical readings or odd disappearances. She would have slammed her palm on the desk and shouted, "This is exactly how it starts." But in The Cursed Child, that vigilance is gone. Delphi moves like a ghost among wizards who should have known better, and the Ministry, so paranoid during Voldemort's return, seems to have gone blind overnight. Number 13. How did she plan to live in the changed timeline? Delphi's entire plan hinges on turning back time and ensuring Voldemort's victory, but she never stops to ask what that world would look like for her. In Deathly Hallows, Voldemort whispers, "There is no good and evil, there is only power." Power meant loyalty, enforced by fear, betrayals punished with death. How would Delphi, a stranger from the future, explain herself to that cold-eyed tyrant? The man who killed Snape without blinking wouldn't hesitate to do the same to a daughter he never raised. Picture the moment she reveals herself in the Great Hall, the dark mark glittering in firelight. Voldemort stares at her with that slitted gaze. "You claim to be my blood," he might hiss, wand raised. He never trusted even his most loyal servants. Bellatrix adored him, yet trembled at his feet. Delphi expects acceptance, but it's far more likely he'd dissect her mind with legilimency, searching for weakness, for lies. His paranoia was legend. He killed Charity Burbage mid-plea. He'd never risk a grown witch with unknown loyalties at his side. And even if she survived that first meeting, What would her life be? Surrounded by Death Eaters like Travers and the Carrows, each one ready to denounce her as a threat. Lucius Malfoy turned coward at the end, but even he knew how to spot ambition. She would have been seen as a rival, a usurper. Bellatrix's madness might have protected her for a time, but without her mother alive, Delphi would be alone in a nest of vipers. Every meal a gamble, every alliance built on terror. She seems to believe the Dark Lord would see her and simply love her. Yet Voldemort couldn't even understand the love Harry's mother died for. Is it love again? He mocked Harry at the final duel. Delphi's fantasy ignores everything about the man she worships. She wanted to change the past but never planned for the day after victory. No new order to rebuild, no strategy to prove her worth, just the blind hope that being his daughter would be enough to save her from his cruelty. Number 14. Why didn't she try to find the Horcruxes? Delphi's obsession with bringing back Voldemort feels strangely shallow when you realize she never even tries to find his Horcruxes. These fragments of soul were the key to his entire quest for immortality. Dumbledore once told Harry, "Lord Voldemort will not be truly gone while his soul remains earthbound and undestroyed." Delphi must have known this. Yet in The Cursed Child she never asks where they were, how they were destroyed, or whether any secrets survived about making new ones. It's as if she doesn't even consider that her father's essence was once scattered through objects like the diary that nearly killed Ginny Weasley. Imagine her finding traces of the diary's magic in Borgin and Burke's. She could have hunted down anyone who remembered Lucius Malfoy bringing it in, pressing for details, trying to recreate the ritual. But no, Delphi seems content to believe Voldemort can simply come back with a time-turner, ignoring the raw horror of what made him immortal in the first place. Even Bellatrix would have understood the need to rebuild his soul. She guarded the cup of Hufflepuff like a fanatic. Delphi, for all her dark lineage, doesn't seem to care. What makes it worse is the Ministry's archives. Hermione, as Minister for Magic, would keep any records about Horcrux investigations sealed away, terrified of someone reviving the idea. But Delphi never tries to break in or even blackmail officials for access. She doesn't search for testimonies from Aurors who destroyed them, like Harry himself. Imagine a scene where she interrogates Harry about the locket, or Nagini, her eyes gleaming with purpose. But that's never in the script. She simply accepts that her father is gone except for one wild chance to stop him dying. It's so thin it breaks the spell. Voldemort's Horcrux plan was the culmination of decades of paranoia and cruelty. If Delphi truly worshipped him, she'd want to finish what he started. She would want his soul whole. Instead, she ignores the single darkest legacy of the Dark Lord. It reduces her from a frightening fanatic to a strangely passive villain who only wants to turn back the clock without understanding what really made her father immortal. Number 15. How did she learn about Harry and his family? Delphi Diggory's plan in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child demands a level of intimate knowledge about Harry Potter, his son Albus, and the entire Potter family that strains credibility when one examines her background. She is supposed to be the secret child of Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange, raised in hiding without connections to wizarding society, yet somehow she possesses a masterful understanding of Harry's life, his personality, and even the day-to-day dynamics of his family. The text gives us no scene, memory, or revelation about her years of research or surveillance that would make this level of planning believable. The entire scheme is built on an unexplained assumption that she simply knows everything about Harry and Albus. When Harry says in the play, we're told she is a Diggory, but she's Voldemort's child, the focus is on the shocking heritage, not on the even more bizarre question of how this supposedly isolated girl became an expert on her target. The play's plot depends heavily on Delphi persuading Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy to travel back in time with her to save Cedric Diggory, exploiting Albus's guilt and resentment. This manipulation requires not just vague knowledge of Albus's emotional struggles, but very specific familiarity with the boy's personality, his relationship with Harry, and his friendship with Scorpius. Albus is described in the script as angry, resentful of his father, and often feeling he is a disappointment. But where did Delphi learn these details we see no trace in the story of her observing them at King's Cross or spying on their arguments at home? Instead, she conveniently knows exactly how to push every emotional button. She appears in their lives at the precise moment of vulnerability without any groundwork shown in the text. Even more troubling is the question of how Delphi knows where Harry and Ginny live, what school year Albus is in, or how to track the schedule of the Hogwarts Express. The play treats these as casual givens, yet the wizarding world has always been cautious about such information. When Harry was a child, the Order of the Phoenix used the Fidelius charm to hide him. While he no longer lives under such powerful protection, it is hard to imagine the Ministry of Magic leaving the boy who lived entirely vulnerable to casual. Stalking. Delphi, growing up in secret, wouldn't have access to ministry records or Hogwarts enrollment lists. There is no mention of her bribing anyone for information or stealing documents. It is simply taken for granted that she knows where to find Harry Potter's son. Delphi also has an uncanny understanding of Albus and Scorpius's friendship, despite supposedly never meeting them before. She knows Scorpius will be willing to help Albus, even though Scorpius is described in the text as nervous, bookish, loyal to his father. Their friendship is the key to the time travel plot, but there is no scene in which Delphi watches them bond or test their loyalty to each other. It's as if she read the script of their lives rather than gathered information in any realistic way. The audience is expected to believe she has a psychological profile on them without any groundwork. This stretches the logic of the wizarding world where surveillance magic exists but is never easy or free of risk. The Marauders map, for example, shows everyone at Hogwarts, but Harry only got it because Fred and George Weasley stole it from Filch. The play offers no magical object that might plausibly let Delphi track the Potters or spy on Albus at Hogwarts. There is no mention of Polyjuice Potion to infiltrate their social circles, or an invisibility cloak to stalk them unseen. She just knows, and this absence of method undermines the dramatic tension. When Voldemort wanted information, he used spies, imperious torture. Delphi uses nothing. Her plan also depends on knowing precisely how Harry and Albus fight. Albus yells at Harry in the script, "I didn't choose to be his son." This is private family drama. Unless Delphi has an informant inside the Potter home, there is no way she should know how raw those arguments are, or how guilty Albus feels about disappointing his father. Yet she exploits that tension perfectly. The play offers no explanation. She's a master psychologist with no education in psychology, reading people she's never met as though she's been living in their house for years. Consider also the matter of Harry's job. He is head of magical law enforcement at the Ministry, a position with access to vast resources and security protocols. Any plan to manipulate his son would require dodging that security, not once, but repeatedly. Delphi meets the boys in secret, travels with them, and evades the Ministry without raising an alarm. The play doesn't show her bribing Ministry officials, hacking the Flu network, or tampering with portkeys. It's simply assumed she can do it because she's Voldemort's daughter, which is not a skill set but a bloodline. One might argue that Delphi got her information from Amos Diggory, whom she pretends to help. But Amos is old, frail, and mostly shut away in St. Oswald's home for old witches and wizards. He is described as frail, angry, grieving. He doesn't have access to Albus Potter's school performance or Harry's family quarrels. If anything, Amos is cut off from modern wizarding society. He could tell Delphi about Cedric's death, but not how to emotionally manipulate Albus Potter a decade later. The play never shows Delphi extracting information from anyone who might plausibly know the Potters. Number 16. Why did no one know about her birth? Bellatrix Lestrange was many things: fanatic, cruel, unwaveringly loyal. But subtlety was not among her natural gifts. Even among the Death Eaters, she stood out for her obsession with Voldemort, something so intense that it was practically legend. Rabastan and Rodolphus Lestrange, her own family, knew it well enough. So the idea that she could carry Voldemort's child without arousing even a whisper among these people, who lived off fear, rumor, and intrigue, is perhaps the most striking logical hole in the entire story of Delphi. Imagine the camp at Malfoy Manor, where the Death Eaters gathered around the long table where Voldemort killed Charity Burbage for teaching Muggle studies. They were a paranoid, tight-knit, and competitive bunch. Severus Snape, Lucius Malfoy, even Fenrir Greyback, they watched one another for signs of favor. Bellatrix's unexplained absence or any change in her condition would have fueled endless suspicion. Yet the play suggests they never noticed. Bellatrix's presence during the Second Wizarding War was not passive or hidden. She duelled in the Department of Mysteries, laughing madly as she killed Sirius Black, taunting Harry with the prophecy in her grasp. She fought at Hogwarts, mocking Molly Weasley before her own death. She was Voldemort's most visible lieutenant, appearing at his side during meetings with Snape, humiliating Narcissa over Draco's failures. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she's the one who burns down the Burrow, who presses Snape about his loyalties, and who guides Draco to the Dark Lord. This is not a woman who vanished quietly for months on end. The idea that she could disappear long enough for a pregnancy to be concealed, and a child to be born, and for no one in that gossipy, backstabbing circle to mention it, is implausible at best. The Death Eaters were not mindless drones, and Voldemort himself encouraged competition. He did not foster trust or love, he fostered fear and jealousy. Even Lucius Malfoy, one of his earliest supporters, fell from grace after losing the prophecy sphere. Bellatrix mocked his disgrace openly, reinforcing the culture of betrayal. Consider the dynamic in the Death Eater ranks. Any hint of Voldemort fathering an heir would have been weaponized instantly. Even if he killed those who spoke too openly, they would have whispered in corners. Voldemort's own paranoia would have made such secrets almost impossible to maintain. He did not even trust his Horcruxes to any one follower completely. He scattered them across trusted and untrusted allies alike. Why would he trust Bellatrix to manage such a monumental secret alone? The storytelling problem becomes clearer when you think about Voldemort's personality. He was obsessed with power, immortality, and his own myth. When Harry sees his memories in the pensive, he watches Riddle's cold charm, his manipulations of Slughorn to learn about Horcruxes. He uses everyone as a means to an end. Voldemort is also vain. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, he boasts of his return. I, who have gone further than anybody along the path that leads to immortality. He relishes drama, terror, and fear. Why would such a man deliberately father a child, something that ties him to human weakness, a relationship, a legacy he cannot fully control? And even if he did, why would he not turn that child into propaganda? Behold, even death could not end my line. He would make her a trophy of his own greatness. Voldemort's complete lack of love or empathy further complicates the logic of Delphi's existence. The books are explicit about it. He never loved. He valued nobody's life but his own. Bellatrix's obsession was one-sided. Her loyalty was worship. Voldemort was too cold, too calculating to want a child in the traditional sense. He killed Bertha Jorkins to make Nagini a Horcrux. He murdered his own father. He ordered the deaths of countless innocents. To maintain power, the very concept that he would allow Bellatrix to carry his child implies a level of biological intimacy and planning that feels at odds with everything the books told us about him. Even if we assume Voldemort somehow wanted this child as a backup plan, a vessel, a weapon, there remains the question of how he kept it secret from Bellatrix's own family. Rodolphus was her husband, part of the inner circle. Would he watch her grow pregnant and never say a word? Would Narcissa, her own sister, who risked everything to save Draco, truly see Bellatrix's condition and keep silent? It is one thing to fear Voldemort's wrath, but family loyalty is not so easily erased. Even if they feared to speak openly, they would have noticed. The wizarding world is small, secrets are currency. Voldemort's own spies would have noticed it if his lieutenant was suddenly vulnerable. Bellatrix was also involved in active battles close to the supposed time of Delphi's conception. At Malfoy Manor, she tortured Hermione, brandished the sword of Gryffindor, duelled Harry and Ron. At the Battle of Hogwarts, she fought to kill. She was not hidden away in some safe house or out of public view. Pregnancies are not subtle transformations. Even with magic, it is hard to believe no one would notice. Polyjuice potion, glamours, disillusionment, all possible, but never hinted at. And the more elaborate the concealment, the less plausible it becomes. Voldemort, who trusted almost no one, would need allies to sustain the lie. Every extra conspirator is a new leak waiting to happen. Furthermore, the Death Eaters themselves had no loyalty to one another. They fled when Voldemort fell. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, many were imprisoned after the First War, and only returned when he did. Even among the inner circle they distrusted each other. Lucius was humiliated for failures, the Carrows fought for favour, Greyback was barely controlled. In such a toxic environment, the idea that all would conspire to hide Bellatrix's pregnancy stretches credibility to the breaking point. They were Voldemort's servants, not his friends, and most would have sold the secret to gain an advantage or save themselves. Number 17. Why would Voldemort allow an heir? He was Lord Voldemort. He was Tom Riddle, the boy who had despised his father for being a muggle and abandoned his mother for being weak enough to die. Every decision he made was sculpted from the raw material of contempt for humanity's frailty, its attachments, its mortality. His very philosophy was the violent rejection of lineage. He would rather fracture his own soul than admit any continuity beyond himself. It is here, in the pulsing heart of this rejection, that the idea of him leaving behind a child becomes not merely puzzling, but grotesquely incongruous. When readers learned of Delphi, the alleged daughter of Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange, this detail crashed through the canon like a battering ram, exposing a deep fissure in the logic of the Dark Lord's story. Voldemort was not a man who shared. He was not a man who planned for a legacy. He was a man who hoarded life itself, even at the cost of mutilating his own essence. It is one thing for a villain to be a father. It is quite another for this villain to choose it. Voldemort's animating goal was the defiance of death. His Horcruxes were engineered to ensure that he alone would remain when time had stripped the world bare of everyone else. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore reflects on his motives, saying, "He was in such a hurry to mutilate his own soul, he never paused to understand the incomparable power of a soul that is untarnished and whole." This single-minded obsession tells us he could never have considered a child as a form of immortality. A child is not a cardi vessel for one's own soul. It is an entirely separate being with its own will, its own destiny. That is not power preserved, it is power relinquished. Readers trying to justify Delphi's existence might argue that Bellatrix could have seduced him or offered herself as a vessel without his interest in legacy, yet even that explanation cracks under scrutiny. Bellatrix Lestrange is presented in the text as utterly devoted, fanatically so, to Voldemort's cause. She worships him as a god, but he is cold in return. There is no hint, no suggestion that Voldemort feels anything approaching sexual desire for her or for anyone else. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, his possession of Harry reveals the alien nature of his own emotions. He possessed Harry, but Harry's love for his friends made it unbearable. Voldemort could not comprehend it. Love, lust, connection, they are alien to him. Why then would he choose to father a child, an act rooted in the most corporeal and human of drives? The problem deepens when we consider Voldemort's view of weakness. He despised his own mother for dying of grief and blamed her for the disgrace of his Muggle father's abandonment. In Half-Blood Prince, we see his fury at the idea of heritage diluted by Muggle blood. I, who have gone further than anybody along the path that leads to immortality. This arrogance did not allow for the possibility of handing over power. Even his Death Eaters were tools, not heirs. Bellatrix might have been fanatically loyal, but she was still expendable. The idea that he would deliberately produce a child who might eventually rival him, whose very purpose as heir is to replace him, is anathema to every trait he demonstrated. Some argue that perhaps Voldemort planned for Delphi to be an acolyte rather than an heir. But even this is flawed. His leadership was predicated on terror, not trust. He shared his secrets with no one. He ensured that his Horcruxes were hidden in ways even his followers could not trace. He did not even tell Snape about them, though he called him his most loyal servant. Why would he deliberately create a potential usurper? A child is not merely a follower trained to obey, but a living challenge to the master's authority. A true heir in the old wizarding sense is by definition someone who will one day take your place. Voldemort would have seen such a concept as the ultimate betrayal of his quest for eternal dominance. Moreover, the entire arc of the original books is a testament to Voldemort's fear of being replaced. The prophecy itself triggers his obsession with eliminating Harry. He misreads the prophecy not as fate, but as challenge, seeking to destroy the one who might supplant him. Neither can live while the other survives. This line defines his terror at the thought of a rival. Why would he willingly create another prophecy-prone child, one who might become the very threat he spent years trying to obliterate? Delphi's existence canonically is not just a retcon but a violation of the philosophical underpinning of Voldemort's villainy. To see the absurdity, imagine Voldemort contemplating fatherhood as strategy. What could he possibly gain? Control over the future? He scorned prophecy as an irritant, something to be subverted. The idea of a dynasty is built on the assumption of death, on an acceptance of one's own eventual disappearance. For Voldemort, that was unacceptable. His entire brand of dark magic was designed to make lineage obsolete. "There is nothing worse than death, Dumbledore," he shrieked in Order of the Phoenix. His fear was so total that he would never tolerate any measure that implied surrender to mortality's cycle. Number 18, why wasn't she mentioned in the post-war world? In the uneasy silence that followed Voldemort's final downfall at the Battle of Hogwarts, the entire wizarding world held its breath. The ruins of the castle smouldered with curses, bodies were counted, and the Ministry of Magic scrambled to restore order. Kingsley Shacklebolt, newly appointed as minister, oversaw a purge of Death Eaters that was both thorough and ruthless. Auras scoured the countryside, rooting out sympathizers and seizing dark objects, while the wizarding population demanded assurances that no remnant of the Dark Lord's terror remained. It was a time of paranoia and vigilant justice, yet the idea that Voldemort might have left behind a daughter went utterly unexamined. This absence of investigation strains all credulity. Even in the books we see the Ministry's zealous obsession with stamping out any trace of Voldemort's legacy. For example, the treatment of the Malfoys illustrates this vividly. Despite Narcissa's key role in saving Harry, they faced public scorn and suspicion. The Malfoys had drifted from the rest of the crowd. Draco was with his mother and father, Deathly Hallows. They were marked forever by association, so it is baffling that the possibility of Voldemort's direct offspring never inspired even a whisper of investigation. When the Ministry's auras and hit wizards fanned out across the country, they left no stone unturned in pursuit of hidden Death Eaters and dark artifacts. Entire families were interrogated about their loyalties, private homes were searched, rumors were treated as actionable intelligence. Even Severus Snape, posthumously vindicated, remained an enigma to many in the wizarding world, a symbol of how complicated allegiances could be. The collective trauma of 2 wars with Voldemort made the wizarding community hyper-vigilant about anything that hinted at his return, and yet this same community somehow overlooked the possibility that the most feared dark wizard in history might have left behind a child, someone who could be groomed in secret to finish what he started. The absence of this fear in canon is more than a narrative gap. It's a collapse of logic considering the Ministry's behavior toward other potential threats. The wizarding world had long memories. Even decades after Grindelwald's defeat, older wizards remembered the terror of his rise. Albus Dumbledore himself spent years tracking down Grindelwald's followers and undoing the damage done. This is the precedent. A defeated, dark wizard's influence wasn't considered dead just because he was gone. The Ministry knew that ideology and loyalty could survive the death of a leader. So when Voldemort fell, there was every reason for the wizarding government to fear and hunt down any biological heir who might inherit his power or rally his old followers. It defies everything about their security. Apparatus and collective trauma that no hint of such a search appears. The idea that Harry and the Ministry would simply dismiss the possibility of Voldemort having a child is especially hard to swallow when you consider that Voldemort had repeatedly returned from apparent death. His ability to evade finality was the defining terror of his reign. We can see the Ministry's post-war strategy in the treatment of the Carrows who were hunted down, tried, and imprisoned. Amicus and Alecto were sadistic but unremarkable in terms of magical power, yet they were considered such a threat that they were pursued immediately after the war. This standard shows how seriously the Ministry took even minor Death Eaters. In contrast, the potential existence of Voldemort's own daughter, a bloodline that might carry his power, knowledge of his Horcruxes, or even loyalty from surviving fanatics, should have triggered the highest-level investigations. Instead, the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child acts as if no one cared to ask the question. Such a fundamental oversight is jarring. It asks readers to accept that the wizarding world, which saw the deaths of hundreds in 2 wars, would simply shrug and move on without the most basic due diligence. Hermione Granger's character in particular highlights the absurdity of this omission. As someone whose entire arc is defined by her relentless pursuit of truth and justice, she would never have let the matter rest. She spent years dismantling the oppressive structures left by Voldemort's regime and was described as tireless in her reform efforts. She was now working for the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures and was very busy with a campaign for the welfare of house elves, Deathly Hallows. This shows her tenacious sense of responsibility. The notion that Hermione, who later becomes Minister for Magic in the Cursed Child timeline, wouldn't have ordered a full investigation into any rumor of Voldemort's child is out of character to the point of absurdity. It ignores everything that makes her Hermione. Harry Potter himself is portrayed in the books as someone haunted by the fear that Voldemort could return in any form. Even after the Horcruxes were destroyed, he was cautious, wary, and determined to prevent the mistakes of the past from repeating. His own children's safety would have made him even more vigilant. Given his experience with prophecy, curses, and Voldemort's obsession with cheating death, Harry would have been the first to demand an investigation into any possibility of a child. He knew better than anyone that Voldemort's power was partly rooted in secrecy. The line, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death," Deathly Hallows, was a chilling reminder of Voldemort's refusal to stay gone. The idea that Harry would overlook a living heir is insulting to the trauma he carried. The magical press, too, cannot be forgotten. Rita Skeeter represents a sensationalist, unscrupulous, but undeniably effective form of journalism. She once devoted an entire, unauthorized biography to Harry that was full of lies but sold because people craved information. Given her talent for exploiting scandal and fear, she would have salivated at the possibility of Voldemort's child. Even without evidence, she would have written innuendo-laden articles, spreading rumors that the Ministry would then be forced to address publicly. The Daily Prophet itself would have sold countless copies speculating about a secret heir. Yet in the play, this possibility is not even acknowledged. It's a strange erasure of the wizarding world's most consistent features: fear, gossip, and political maneuvering. Let's not forget Draco Malfoy, who spent much of his post-war life trying to rehabilitate his family's reputation. The Malfoys had walked a treacherous line during the war, and Draco, as seen in the epilogue, was older but still marked by the past. Draco Malfoy was standing there with his wife and son, Deathly Hallows. He, of all people, would have a personal stake in uncovering any rumor of Voldemort's child, if only to distance his family from that legacy. He knew what it meant to be judged for family connections. In any realistic post-war scenario, Draco would have been desperate to prove that Scorpius was not a potential Dark Lord in waiting. The play tries to use this fear for drama, but it ignores the fact that this conversation would have already happened, publicly and painfully, years before. Even the Department of Mysteries would have taken an interest. This department, obsessed with the fundamental laws of magic, would be extremely curious about the lineage of a wizard who split his soul into Horcruxes and defied death. A child of Voldemort would represent an unprecedented magical anomaly worthy of lifelong study or containment. The Unspeakables might even consider such a child a threat to magical stability itself. In the aftermath of the war, with so many magical secrets laid bare, it is simply illogical that they would not have investigated every rumor of his possible heir. But the play conveniently pretends such curiosity never existed, reducing the entire wizarding world to willful ignorance. Consider the legacy of Tom Riddle's orphanage. When Dumbledore visited him as a boy, he already understood the risk of Voldemort's lineage. He treated young Tom with suspicion, recognizing the danger in his heritage and talents. "I knew I was different," Tom said in Half-Blood Prince, revealing the twisted pride he took in his abilities. Dumbledore's approach shows the wizarding world had precedent for worrying about inherited darkness. After 2 wars with Voldemort, any whisper of his child would have sparked that same caution in teachers at Hogwarts, aurors in the field, and ministry officials. To suggest they would simply forget this lesson is to betray the internal logic of the entire Harry Potter saga. It is also striking that in a society obsessed with blood purity and lineage, no one seemed interested in Voldemort's own bloodline. Pure blood families like the Blacks and Malfoys documented their ancestry in detail. Blood status was an obsession that drove Voldemort's entire ideology. The idea that no one cared about his child is absurd on its face. Even Muggle genealogists can trace lineages for centuries. The wizarding world had both the motive and the magical means, like the family tree tapestry at Grimmauld Place, to investigate this question. Ignoring it insults the intelligence of the characters and the reader alike. The issue becomes even clearer when we remember that after the war, the wizarding world built memorials to the fallen, institutionalized war histories, and made sure the lessons of Voldemort's rise were remembered. Statues in Hogwarts commemorated the dead. These were people determined never to forget, never to allow his ideology to take root again. Yet in Cursed Child, the existence of Voldemort's daughter is treated as if no one in this memory-obsessed society would care. It turns an entire generation of survivors into unthinking plot devices who exist only to enable a surprise twist. Moreover, the secrecy surrounding Bellatrix Lestrange's pregnancy is itself hard to accept. She was not a prisoner. She was constantly under surveillance by other Death Eaters at Malfoy Manor, including Narcissa and Lucius. The idea that she would carry Voldemort's child to term unnoticed strains all credibility. Bellatrix was fanatically loyal and violently unstable, not someone who could keep such a momentous secret while under the eyes of people who were terrified of her. Her devotion would have turned the child into a living relic of Voldemort's power, an object of cultish obsession among surviving Death Eaters. Yet we are asked to believe no one noticed or spoke of it. Even the Hogwarts staff would have cared. After the war, the school became a center for healing and rebuilding. Minerva McGonagall, as headmistress, would have treated any rumor about Voldemort's child with utmost seriousness. She had seen the school turned into a military outpost, watched students tortured and killed. She would have understood the risk of that darkness returning through a new generation. She was a woman who took her duty to her students with deadly seriousness. Ignoring that possibility would not have been in her nature. The entire magical community that vowed never again would have scrutinized every rumor. Ultimately, the notion that Voldemort's daughter could have existed undetected, unchallenged, and unmentioned insults the intelligence of the entire post-war wizarding world. It asks readers to forget the trauma, the vigilance, and the bitter lessons learned at such great cost. It cheapens the sacrifices of characters who fought and died to ensure Voldemort's evil would not return. By pretending that no one would investigate or even wonder about his child, the narrative of Cursed Child fails its own legacy, betraying the carefully constructed logic and moral urgency that made the original series so compelling. Number 19. How did she learn about the prophecy? Delphi Diggory emerged from the shadows of the wizarding world as a character whose very existence unsettled the fragile peace that had followed Voldemort's defeat. Among the most baffling elements of her story lies the mysterious prophecy she claimed to have discovered, a prophecy that supposedly bound her fate to the resurrection of the Dark Lord. The origin of this prophecy, however, is never explained in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, and the gaps left in this account challenge even the most willing reader's suspension of disbelief. In the established canon, prophecies were fiercely protected, especially after the chaos caused by Sybil Trelawney's original prediction about Harry and Voldemort. Yet Delphi spoke of her destiny as though it were common knowledge, an inevitable truth she had absorbed without question or evidence. The Department of Mysteries held countless glass orbs on towering shelves, each bearing a fragile record of fate spoken into being by a seer. The orb that contained the prophecy about Harry Potter and Voldemort was so jealously guarded that only those named within it could retrieve it safely. When Harry attempted to remove it, he was able to do so because he was directly mentioned. The Death Eaters could not. They had to manipulate Harry to fetch it for them. This tight security was emphasized in Order of the Phoenix when Lucius Malfoy demanded the orb and Harry read its dusty label. Delphi had no such direct connection to any official record in the Ministry, nor any standing among the remaining Death Eaters to be entrusted with such a dangerous secret. One must consider the practicality of Delphi's knowledge. If the prophecy truly existed in the Department of Mysteries, Delphi would have required either infiltration or betrayal at the highest level of the Ministry to acquire it. Her background does not suggest such resources. Raised in relative obscurity by Euphemia Roll, she was hidden rather than empowered. No references exist in the text to her orchestrating a covert mission into the Ministry or cultivating a network of informants. And yet when she encounters Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy, she proclaims the prophecy as if she had always known it, stating, "I am the augury, and I will bring my father back." No explanation bridges the chasm between this assertion and any credible source for her information. The reader is left to wonder whether Delphi simply invented the prophecy to cloak her own ambition in mysticism. If so, this would be an interesting psychological study of a young woman desperate to validate her identity as Voldemort's daughter, but the play treats her conviction as fact, implying that such a prophecy did exist in some tangible form. This is difficult to reconcile with the principle that prophecies are recorded and stored by the unspeakables. Without access to a seer who uttered it or to the Ministry's archives, Delphi's knowledge has no clear point of origin. The play's narrative skirts this problem, never offering even a passing reference to how she came into possession of such a monumental revelation. If one imagines the possible paths by which she could have learned of a prophecy, each collapses under scrutiny. Perhaps she interrogated a surviving Death Eater, but no such scene is recounted, and no Death Eater was known to have held an unarchived prophecy in memory. Or perhaps she found a hidden diary or letter left behind by Voldemort or Bellatrix Lestrange, describing a prophecy foretold in secret. Yet the text is silent on any such artifact. Delphi instead recites her destiny with eerie calm, saying, "I was born to restore my father," as though she were reciting a bedtime story repeated since infancy. But whose voice taught her those words? Whose hand wrote them down? The play offers no clue. Moreover, if Delphi had somehow convinced herself of this destiny in the absence of a genuine prophecy, the Ministry and the Order would almost certainly have intervened the moment her belief came to light. In the wizarding world, false prophecies can be nearly as dangerous as true ones, yet no one seems aware of her convictions until she is already attempting to manipulate time itself. Even more curiously, Albus and Scorpius, when confronted with Delphi's proclamation, never question the origin of her knowledge. They react with fear rather than skepticism, accepting her story at face value. In contrast, when Harry first heard the prophecy naming him, Dumbledore spent hours explaining its provenance and consequences. The lack of any such grounding here feels like a missing cornerstone in the narrative. If the prophecy existed in a hidden sphere within the Department of Mysteries, Delphi would have needed to bypass not only the protective enchantments, but also the enchantments that ensured only the named parties could safely touch it. Recall that in Order of the Phoenix, when Neville Longbottom tried to help Harry carry the orb, it nearly shattered in his hands. For Delphi to retrieve or even glimpse the prophecy without injury, she would have had to be named within it. The play, however, never specifies that she was. Instead, she appears to be acting on a certainty she cannot substantiate, declaring herself the living instrument of fate. Some may argue that she learned the prophecy from her mother, Bellatrix Lestrange, before Bellatrix's death, but even this scenario is implausible. Bellatrix died during the Battle of Hogwarts fighting Molly Weasley, and there is no evidence she had time to record a detailed confession or prophecy. Furthermore, Bellatrix was never portrayed as a prophetess or even someone who trafficked in divination. Her fanaticism was rooted in Voldemort's ideology, not in Seer's visions. The suggestion that she privately nurtured knowledge of her child's destiny contradicts everything known about her character. A more outlandish possibility is that Delphi received this information from a loyalist who claimed to have heard the prophecy themselves. But again, the question arises, where was this loyalist hiding? The surviving Death Eaters were scattered, imprisoned, or in hiding. No named character ever steps forward to reveal themselves as Delphi's confidant or mentor. The play misses an opportunity to explore how such a momentous secret could be passed through the ruins of a fallen movement, unremarked upon by every wizarding authority. Another element that heightens the implausibility is the way Delphi uses the prophecy as a justification for her actions, rather than as a riddle to be deciphered. She speaks of it with total confidence, never questioning whether she misunderstood it or whether it might be symbolic. When Trelawney made her prediction about Harry and Voldemort, Dumbledore himself admitted he did not fully understand it at first. But Delphi never exhibits any uncertainty. She acts as if her knowledge is perfect and her interpretation unassailable, which feels unnatural for a character with no formal training in divination. The tone of inevitability in Delphi's proclamations also clashes with how prophecies are treated elsewhere in the canon. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore explains that prophecy is a dangerous tool. It gains power only when people choose to act upon it. "You are the true master of death," he tells Harry, "because the Elder Wand recognized you as its master." This principle of self-fulfilling prophecy is essential to understanding the tension in the original series. Yet in Cursed Child, Delphi's prophecy seems to have deterministic force, requiring no interpretation or choice. It is simply an instruction she claims to have received, one that everyone around her inexplicably believes. Even when considering the possibility that Delphi invented the prophecy as a tactic to manipulate Albus and Scorpius, the play fails to treat this as an open question. There is no moment in which the boys reflect on whether she might be lying, no attempt to confirm the existence of the prophecy, no search for evidence in the Ministry archives. They accept her version of events with an almost childlike credulity. This lack of inquiry feels inconsistent with the series' tradition of skeptical investigation. Harry himself spent years questioning Dumbledore, Snape, and the Order about half-truths and hidden motives. That the protagonists here do not even try to verify Delphi's claims robs the story of its tension and realism. By presenting the prophecy as an unquestioned fact, the narrative leans on the reader's willingness to accept an unexplained certainty. This is not a small oversight. It undermines the credibility of Delphi's entire arc. If the story had shown her searching for the prophecy, deciphering fragments of it, or confronting those who hid it, her conviction would feel earned. Instead, the audience is asked to believe she knows something no one else knows, for reasons no one can explain. This is not merely a missing detail, it is a missing foundation. Every prophecy in Rowling's universe was treated with gravity, complexity, and consequences. Delphi's knowledge, in contrast, emerges fully formed, untested, and unearned. The play's refusal to explore how she learned of it leaves the reader with a hollow certainty. A character driven by a motive that no one can trace to any credible source. This is why, for many, Delphi's destiny feels less like fate and more like a narrative shortcut. Number 20. Why didn't anyone see her training? Delphi Diggory, Delphini Riddle, the so-called daughter of Voldemort, remains one of the most perplexing additions to the Harry Potter universe, not only because of the dubious notion that Voldemort would have had a child, but because the logistics of her training defy all sense of the post-war wizarding world's security apparatus. After Voldemort's defeat at the Battle of Hogwarts, the Ministry of Magic underwent massive reforms, purging Death Eater sympathizers and creating surveillance systems designed specifically to detect any resurgence of dark arts. Harry Potter himself, as head of the Aura Office, dedicated years to rooting out dark objects, magical contraband, and hidden cells of Death Eaters. And yet somehow, Delphi grew up mastering advanced dark magic so effectively she could pose a threat to Harry's generation, all without attracting a single investigator's attention. One is forced to ask, where exactly did she learn to do this? The cursed child gives us the vague figure of Euphemia Roll, who allegedly raised her, but no detail suggests how this woman could single-handedly run an elite underground academy of the dark arts under the Ministry's nose. It becomes even more difficult to accept when considering the nature of wizarding society itself. The wizarding world is small, tightly knit, and full of watchful eyes. This is the same world where Dumbledore knew the genealogy of Tom Riddle's mother in exquisite detail, and where families are traced on ancient family trees like the Black's tapestry. We're all related in some way, Sirius Black once remarked in Order of the Phoenix. Euphemia Roll herself was part of a notorious family, branded with a reputation for blood purity and Death Eater sympathies. After the war, any Roll would have been under observation. It strains belief to think she could regularly host a child, train her in dark curses, and rehearse forbidden spells without Ministry investigators noticing. The book provides no account of warding spells or concealment charms on her home that would rival even number 12, Grimmauld Place. And even Grimmauld Place required a secret keeper to stay hidden from the Ministry. Are we to assume Euphemia Roll was such a genius in concealment she outwitted an entire department of auras for 2 decades? The level of magic Delphi demonstrates suggests years of focused advanced study in illegal magic. In Cursed Child, she duels Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy with unsettling skill, manipulating time-turners, casting deadly curses, and holding her own against trained wizards. She orchestrates a plan to rewrite time itself, a feat requiring vast theoretical knowledge of magical lore, temporal enchantments, and combat magic. Even assuming she was a Prodigy, she needed resources: scrolls, books, tutors, practice dummies, or even living targets. Unlike Hogwarts, which offers spell practice rooms, dueling clubs, and professors, where exactly did Delphi conduct these lessons? Under Euphemia's supervision in her living room? The idea that the Ministry's trace system, which identifies underage magic outside school, wouldn't have been triggered at least once in Delphi's teenage years feels laughably convenient. Even if she came of age before serious training began, the dark magic she used was still traceable by the types of residual magical signatures the Aura Office specifically hunted for after the war. There's also the issue of social integration and identity management. In Cursed Child, Delphi impersonates Amos Diggory's niece, embedding herself in his household at St. Oswald's home for old witches and wizards. She adopts a caring, even manipulative demeanor to win his trust, but the play offers no explanation of how she maintained such secrecy for decades before this plan. The wizarding world is small enough that Delphi Diggory would need documents, a wand registered with Ollivander, perhaps a Hogwarts education record, or at least some fabricated personal history. Who provided these? It's one thing for Euphemia Roll to hide a baby in the aftermath of Voldemort's defeat, but raising a child with no paper trail, no wand registration, and no interactions with the wider world seems impossible in a society that places so much faith in magical documentation. Remember the way the Ministry automatically tracked wands in Deathly Hallows, seizing those of Muggleborns for verification? How did Delphi's wand go unnoticed all these years? Even if Euphemia Roll were a die-hard loyalist and practiced in dark concealment magic, she'd need allies. The Death Eater network was decimated after Voldemort's fall. The Malfoys famously claimed they'd been under the Imperious curse. Bellatrix Lestrange was dead. Rodolphus Lestrange was imprisoned. The Carrows were disgraced. Who could have helped Euphemia organize a curriculum in the unforgivable curses, in advanced dueling strategies, or in the creation of dark artifacts? Delphi's plan in Cursed Child shows an intimate understanding of time-turner technology, something the Ministry strictly controlled after the disastrous Time Room incidents. All the time-turners were destroyed in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries. Hermione reminds us in Order of the Phoenix. How would Delphi even begin to learn about them, much less master their use, without access to deeply restricted Ministry files or an inside contact? Delphi's proficiency in legilimency is another unexplained area. In Cursed Child, she easily manipulates others, hints at reading thoughts or desires with subtlety rivaling Snape's. Legilimency is not a skill one learns by accident. Snape's mastery came from decades of study under Eileen Prince's stern guidance and years of practical refinement in Voldemort's circle. Voldemort himself was the most accomplished legilimens of his age. Are we to imagine Euphemia Roll, a minor Death Eater sympathizer, also possessed this knowledge and could transmit it? Or that Delphi practiced on random people in the wizarding world without them realizing? Their thoughts were being invaded. Such repeated use of legilimency would leave evidence, behavioral oddities, reports of mental breaks. The Ministry post-war was vigilant about such crimes precisely because of Voldemort's reign of terror. Moreover, Delphi's talents in nonverbal magic are taken for granted. In the play, she casts spells silently in combat and manipulates her environment with expert finesse. Nonverbal spellcasting is advanced even for Hogwarts students, something taught only in the 6th year. Remember Harry's frustration learning it in Half-Blood Prince. "You need to concentrate, Potter," Snape snapped, highlighting the skill's demanding focus. For Delphi to reach such mastery without Hogwarts classes or a private tutor of Dumbledore's caliber is absurd. Did she simply self-study from illegal books? Where did she get these books? Borgin and Burke's was under surveillance after the war. Nocturne Alley was crawling with informants. The Ministry had auras monitoring the trade in cursed objects and dangerous grimoires. The idea that Euphemia Roll maintained a fully stocked dark library at home without raising red flags feels like an egregious narrative oversight. One must also consider the question of practice. Dark curses require more than rote memorization. The Cruciatus curse demands emotional hatred, the Imperius curse requires invasive control, and the Killing curse requires a sincere desire to kill, as Harry learned in Deathly Hallows. Even if Delphi had these emotions, and her fanatic devotion to Voldemort suggests she might, how did she safely practice them? Who volunteered to be tortured? Were there hapless muggles she abducted? That would have triggered magical detection systems designed to identify illicit curses on muggle bodies. Did she experiment on animals? The wizarding world has strict magical creature protection laws. Even the use of forbidden curses on creatures would leave magical traces an investigator could follow, yet we hear nothing of any investigation. Another baffling gap lies in how she planned her grand scheme without collaborators betraying her. In Cursed Child, she ultimately fails because Albus and Scorpius uncover her plan, yet before that there is no sign she used a network of Death Eater remnants. Her entire operation seems a one-woman show. She gains Amos Diggory's trust, identifies a new prototype time-turner, and manipulates Harry's son into helping her. This level of espionage requires not only magical skill but a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and ministry procedures. Even Barty Crouch Jr. needed Polyjuice Potion, inside contacts at Hogwarts, and the forced cooperation of Mad-Eye Moody to execute his plan in Goblet of Fire. Delphi has no such infrastructure. Her cover as Amos's niece is equally implausible. Amos Diggory is a grieving father, famous in wizarding circles as a ministry official and victim of the Triwizard Tournament tragedy. Anyone checking in on him would notice a mysterious young woman suddenly playing nurse and confidant. The wizarding community gossips obsessively. Rita Skeeter's Daily Prophet columns dissected Harry's entire life in humiliating detail. How did they miss the scoop of Amos Diggory's long-lost niece? Are we meant to believe no one asked questions? No former ministry colleague of Amos's paid a visit or mentioned her existence to Harry or Hermione? This is the same community that rooted out Muggleborns with genealogical audits during Voldemort's regime. Even the psychological dimension of Delphi's upbringing goes unexamined. Raised in secrecy by a fanatical guardian who worshipped her father, Delphi would have had an intense, isolated, and potentially unstable childhood. She would need to be indoctrinated with Voldemort's ideology while also receiving a rigorous education in magic. But how did Euphemia manage both? Was she a skilled teacher? Did she know enough arithmancy, potions, charms, and defense against the dark arts to tutor a Dark Lord's heir to a level rivaling professional auras? The Hogwarts curriculum is the work of dozens of specialists, each with mastery in their field. Yet Cursed Child gives us no hint Euphemia was anything more than a hateful old woman with Death Eater sympathies. Her knowledge of prophecy is equally suspicious. Delphi obsesses over the line "when spares are spared" and clearly interprets it with precision. Prophecy study is an arcane art. Even Voldemort misunderstood the original prophecy about Harry, leading to his downfall. Delphi, however, displays a flawless, if fanatical, reading of her own destiny. Did Euphemia teach her divination? Did they raid the Department of Mysteries for records? In Order of the Phoenix, we see that even the prophecy spheres are guarded, break when touched by the wrong person, and are carefully archived. Yet Delphi's familiarity with such lore is never explained. Lastly, there is the sheer improbability that Harry himself never heard a whisper about her. After the war, he dedicated his life to stopping any dark resurgence. He interrogated surviving Death Eaters. He worked alongside Kingsley Shacklebolt's reformed ministry. And yet no one ever mentioned that Bellatrix Lestrange had a child, that Euphemia Rawle was caring for an heir, or that Voldemort's line might survive. Even rumors would have sent Harry investigating. But Cursed Child simply expects us to believe this most dogged, vigilant aura missed the single greatest threat to peace for 2 decades, while Delphi grew in power and knowledge, preparing to overthrow everything he fought for. It is a plot hole so vast, it defies the very logic that made the original series so compelling. Number 21. Why didn't she use legilimency? Delphi's existence in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child has been the spark for many debates. But the most unsettling question is why she never employs legilimency or occlumency, despite being the daughter of the Dark Lord himself. Her father, Lord Voldemort, was infamous for the way he invaded the minds of others. He did it to Harry Potter repeatedly, to the point where Dumbledore warned, "The connection between you and Voldemort is now something neither of you can control." Voldemort's affinity for probing into thoughts was a hallmark of his power, and he exploited it to manipulate allies and enemies alike. Yet Delphi, who should have been raised with knowledge of such formidable skills, relies instead on persuasive speeches and elaborate disguises. The script never offers a real justification for why this daughter of magical supremacy seems to avoid the dark arts most associated with her father's mastery over fear. The moment she lures Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy to the past, Delphi employs deception and brute force rather than mental incursion. She masquerades as a sympathetic ally in order to win their trust, eventually revealing her ambition to restore Voldemort. She declares, "I am the daughter of Voldemort," as though that alone were sufficient to establish her authority. But if she truly wanted to guarantee her plan's success, why would she risk the unpredictability of teenage boys? At any moment, either of them could have betrayed her intentions or failed to understand her instructions. Had Delphi slipped into Albus's thoughts with even a fraction of Voldemort's finesse, she could have verified their loyalties or forced compliance. The absence of this tactic undermines the credibility of her character and creates a puzzling gap between her lineage and her behavior. In Order of the Phoenix, readers saw how legilimency operated with chilling efficiency. When Voldemort possessed Harry's mind, Harry felt such agony that he nearly lost himself entirely. The text recounts, he was Voldemort, and the pain was beyond anything he'd ever felt. Occlumency was the only defense, a skill so difficult that even Snape grudgingly admitted it required discipline few possessed. It is therefore bewildering that Delphi, who was presented as a figure of destiny, apparently never learned these same arts. Considering the Death Eater's reverence for legilimency, it defies logic that Bellatrix's daughter would ignore this inheritance. Delphi's choice to rely on emotional manipulation, her long monologues about her parentage, her wistful claims of loneliness, reveals a curious narrative inconsistency. The script positions her as a master planner, but her methods are amateurish in comparison to the subtler threats Harry faced. When Barty Crouch Jr. impersonated Mad-Eye Moody, he employed a polyjuice potion and psychological pressure to orchestrate an entire year's worth of deception. Delphi, by contrast, stands on a rooftop and pleads for understanding rather than securing it through the mental domination Voldemort perfected. For a villain who claims to carry her father's ambition, her refusal to use legilimency feels like an omission so glaring that it diminishes her menace. In the climactic scene at Godric's Hollow, Delphi corners Albus and Scorpius, intent on ensuring that Voldemort will emerge victorious. She binds them with magical ropes, proclaims her destiny, and threatens to murder them if they interfere. But even as she brandishes her wand, she never attempts to look inside their thoughts. One might argue that the boys' terror alone should have made them transparent to legilimency, as fear weakens resistance. Yet Delphi speaks only in proclamations. She says, "I will bring my father back," rather than silently invading their minds to see what they planned. The tension is reduced to melodrama instead of a genuine contest of wills. The scene loses the suffocating dread that characterized Voldemort's presence in Harry's head. Even more perplexing is that Delphi possesses ample opportunity to practice legilimency on Albus throughout their interactions. In the first act, she gains his trust by presenting herself as a confidant who understands what it means to grow up in someone's shadow. Albus feels isolated by his famous lineage, and Delphi exploits that vulnerability. But rather than ensuring her advantage, through a quick glimpse into his thoughts, she gambles everything on superficial rapport. The result is that her plan nearly collapses multiple times because she cannot predict the boy's intentions. If she had inherited even a fraction of Voldemort's instinct for psychological warfare, she would have secured her victory without a fraction of this risk. This omission is especially baffling because Delphi is described as powerful enough to hold her own in duels against adult witches and wizards. When Harry, Ginny, Draco, and Hermione confront her, she conjures barriers of dark magic so formidable that they struggle to break them. The stage directions state, "She is magnificent, she is terrifying." That same magnitude of power is never applied to the mind. The result is a villain who feels incomplete, as if she were conceived only in fragments. Her magical prowess is at odds with her strategic naivety. One would expect Voldemort's daughter to understand that the greatest weapon is not brute force, but control over knowledge and perception. Readers can recall how Voldemort's legilimency shaped the entire arc of Harry's 5th year. He implanted visions, manipulated dreams, and eventually lured Harry into a trap by showing a false image of Sirius's suffering. This was a masterstroke of psychological subterfuge. If Delphi had inherited such an ability, she might have shown Albus a vision of his father's death to compel his obedience. Instead, she settles for shouting threats and conjuring ropes. The script never suggests she lacks the talent, it simply never acknowledges the possibility. This narrative silence is the most conspicuous weakness in her portrayal. The problem is compounded by Delphi's repeated insistence that she is her father's true heir. When she finally reveals her identity, she speaks with a fervor that borders on religious devotion. "I am the augury," she cries, invoking a symbol of prophecy and doom. But if she truly believed she was the embodiment of her father's will, it is impossible to imagine she would ignore the techniques that made him invincible. Her refusal to use legilimency contradicts her own mythology, reducing her from an inheritor of terror to a theatrical antagonist who relies on exposition rather than action. It would have been far more compelling and frightening if Delphi had proven her kinship to Voldemort by quietly breaking through Albus's occlumency. Imagine a moment where Albus feels her presence behind his thoughts, an echo of the same invasive cold he once read about in Harry's stories. The text could have drawn a parallel to Voldemort's own words. "There is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it." But this opportunity for narrative resonance is lost, replaced by spectacle and monologue. Her use of more conventional manipulation, pretending to be Cedric's cousin, feigning vulnerability, makes sense as an initial tactic, but it should have been paired with the inevitability of mental incursion. If she could disarm Albus's mind, she would have no need for persuasion. Instead, the script insists on her theatricality, suggesting she never learned the very abilities that defined her father's terror. It is an oversight that cheapens her menace and reduces her to a symbol without substance. Some defenders of the script argue that Delphi's upbringing might have deprived her of instruction in legilimency. However, this explanation is never supported by the text itself. On the contrary, she appears to have been carefully trained in prophecy, dueling, and time travel. If she had time to master complex temporal spells, it is implausible she would have neglected an art so central to her father's legend. The absence of any reference to her using or even attempting legilimency creates a void in the story's internal logic. This inconsistency is not a trivial quibble. It reveals a deeper flaw in Delphi's construction as a villain. She is meant to be a legacy of Voldemort, the final embodiment of his ambition, and the culmination of the dark arts he perfected. But her actions are clumsy and incomplete, as though the narrative were afraid to give her the full measure of her inheritance. The result is a character whose terror feels artificial, more a theatrical mask than a genuine threat. For a play that aspires to extend the saga's darkness, this is an ironic failure. Number 22. Why didn't she attempt Horcrux rituals? Delphi, the self-proclaimed daughter of Lord Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange, stands as one of the most confounding characters in the Harry Potter canon, precisely because her central plan in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child feels so thin when scrutinized against the weight of what is known about dark magic. Obsessed with restoring her father to power, she focuses entirely on time-turner travel to alter the Battle of Hogwarts outcome rather than investigating the very magic that kept Voldemort alive beyond human limits for decades. It is strange to see her so devoted yet so careless with her research. Voldemort's method of survival was the Horcrux. He split his soul through murder, embedding the fragments in objects to avoid true death. This was well documented among his Death Eaters, at least in hushed rumour. Even Harry learned in Half-Blood Prince. He didn't want to die, just like the rest of us. He searched for a way to make himself immortal. And yet Delphi, who worships him, ignores this magic entirely. It is worth pausing to see how odd this omission is, because in canon there are always people with knowledge of Horcruxes lurking in the margins. Dumbledore knew. Harry knew. Hermione read about it in Secrets of the Darkest Art. Slughorn held a memory of explaining it to Tom Riddle. And even Voldemort's followers had hints. Bellatrix's zeal over the cup in Gringotts, Malfoy's fear of disobeying Voldemort after the diary fiasco. The wizarding world at large did not speak the word aloud, but the Death Eaters lived and breathed Voldemort's magic. If Delphi was truly raised to revere him, wouldn't she have heard even whispers of the secret that defined his power? It is one thing for a casual witch to be ignorant of Horcruxes. It is quite another for his devoted daughter. Consider the way Delphi is portrayed in Cursed Child: cunning, manipulative, willing to kill, entirely devoted to restoring her father's rule. She orchestrates a plan that involves tricking Scorpius and Albus into repeated, risky use of an illegal time-turner. She is determined enough to practice advanced dueling magic and to threaten teenagers with death. The script states, "I am the augury," Delphi says with chilling finality, revealing her self-identification as a harbinger of his return. If this is her level of devotion, why settle for a single fragile plan dependent on time manipulation rather than the darkest of dark magic that actually worked for Voldemort himself? The text from Half-Blood Prince is explicit about the process. You must understand the soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It is against nature. Slughorn's fear and shame show how taboo the knowledge is, but not that it is unattainable. Hermione finds the instructions in a book. The Ministry could ban all such volumes, but books are hard to truly erase, especially when they are already known to exist in multiple copies. Borgin and Burkes trafficked in cursed objects for decades. Even after Voldemort's fall, the world is full of dark corners where a determined seeker might find forbidden texts. Delphi grew up after the war's end, but idolized her father's legend. She could have hunted these sources, bribed or tortured the last Death Eaters, or haunted Nocturne Alley for scraps of lore. One might argue that the knowledge of Horcruxes was suppressed after the Battle of Hogwarts. That is plausible, but does it hold for Delphi? She is not a rule-bound Hogwarts student like Hermione, afraid to break laws. She is a terrorist in training, willing to upend time itself. It seems naive to assume the Ministry's censorship would stop her. Voldemort himself never had a problem finding out about Horcruxes as a student, and he lived in an age when Grindelwald's war had made the world even more cautious about dark magic. Delphi had every reason and opportunity to pursue the same path, even if the books were burned. Even if the Ministry hunted down every copy, there remained living witnesses to the theory. Delphi's own heritage also suggests the possibility of access to these secrets. Bellatrix Lestrange was his most fanatical follower, and she carried Delphi before the Battle of Hogwarts. While Bellatrix likely would not have explained Horcruxes in detail to an unborn child, it is possible that Delphi grew up in environments sympathetic to Voldemort's ideals, filled with Death Eater remnants. Even with her father gone, there were old alliances, scattered sympathizers, and perhaps relics in safe houses. It strains credibility to think no one ever mentioned the word Horcrux in her presence. The Death Eaters fled or went underground, but they did not all die at Hogwarts. The Malfoys survived, however disgraced. Rodolphus Lestrange survived Azkaban. These are precisely the types who might have shared rumours if pressed. Indeed, the narrative of Cursed Child deliberately ignores these possibilities. Instead of showing Delphi hunting down forbidden libraries or seeking old Death Eaters in grim corners of the world, she sits in the familiar trope of the time travel paradox, hoping to rewrite the past at its most dramatic point. Yet time-turners are known to be extremely fragile. Even the canonical Department of Mysteries ones were destroyed in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries. The one she uses is a special prototype, more stable but still dangerous and unpredictable. Why would a devoted child of Voldemort stake everything on that one idea when Voldemort himself never trusted anything so uncertain? Voldemort's entire survival plan was built on redundancy. 7 Horcruxes, each designed to ensure that he could not die even if one was destroyed. Delphi shows none of that caution or strategic thinking. It is worth remembering that Voldemort's Horcrux plan was gruesome but effective. When Harry asks Dumbledore how one creates a Horcrux, Dumbledore replies, by committing murder. Killing rips the soul apart. The idea is clear. Anyone with sufficient ruthlessness could do it if they were willing to pay the spiritual cost. Delphi is portrayed as willing to kill for her father. She murders Craig Bowker Jr. without hesitation. The moral threshold is not the issue for her. She would presumably have no qualms about murdering to split her own soul or to recreate her father's in some twisted ritual. The omission of this possibility is less a moral limitation of the character than a narrative convenience for the playwrights. Even if she had limited knowledge of the precise ritual, why would she not at least try to investigate it? In Chamber of Secrets, even a Hogwarts second-year Harry starts noticing the term Horcrux when Tom Riddle drops cryptic hints. When Dumbledore tells Harry in Half-Blood Prince, very few know what it means. Slughorn was horrified when I asked him. He acknowledges it is obscure but not lost. Hermione finds it in the Hogwarts Library's restricted section. Would Delphi not check similar sources? She had years to plan. Her father's resurrection was her only goal. It seems inconceivable that she would fail to pursue the only method that had already demonstrably worked. Moreover, the idea that the Ministry of Magic could effectively suppress Horcrux lore is belied by the books themselves. Even after the war, dark objects circulate freely. Borgin and Burke's remains in business. The Malfoys continue to live in luxury, despite Lucius's crimes. The post-war wizarding world shows signs of wanting to move on, rather than hunt down every trace of the past. Yes, there might have been a crackdown on certain texts, but the Black Family Library contained books on Horcruxes, and Sirius mentions it in Order of the Phoenix. Most of these books are just pure evil. How many similar libraries remained hidden after Voldemort's defeat? Delphi's plan ultimately depends on changing history at its most dramatic and guarded point, the night of the Battle of Hogwarts. This was the time when Voldemort's guard was highest, when Harry had the Elder Wand, and when the entire Order of the Phoenix was on alert. Her idea of simply reuniting Voldemort with his wand or preventing his death feels almost naive next to the horror of creating Horcruxes. It is not that Horcrux making would be easy, but it would be a plan that Voldemort himself would respect. Careful preparation, ruthless murder, splitting of souls, long-term payoff. Delphi's actual plan is the opposite: reckless, public, desperate. Voldemort valued cunning above all else. Delphi seems oddly unaware of this. One of the more damning inconsistencies is Delphi's supposed intelligence. She is depicted as a skilled occlumens, capable of lying even to those trained to see truth. She is a master manipulator, capable of turning Albus and Scorpius into pawns. Her ability to strategize is clear in how she impersonates Amos Diggory's nurse and infiltrates the Diggory home. Why does that cunning vanish when it comes to planning her father's resurrection? Why not hedge her bets? Why not use both time travel and Horcrux rituals in parallel? Even Voldemort used multiple plans simultaneously, from the diary to the cup to Nagini. Delphi shows none of that layered, paranoid thinking. When Voldemort says in Goblet of Fire, "I, who have gone further than anybody along the path that leads to immortality," he refers precisely to his Horcrux work. He describes it as his greatest accomplishment. If Delphi revered him as a father and messiah, why ignore that legacy? Even as a plot device, the omission feels glaring. She might have failed, but the attempt itself would have made her more believable. Imagine Delphi haunting the ruins of Malfoy Manor for hidden texts, bribing former snatchers for clues, or interrogating surviving Death Eaters for Slughorn-like memories. The play skips all that in favor of dramatic time travel sequences that ignore the fundamental question: why would someone so obsessed with Voldemort forget the thing that made him immortal? If anything, Delphi's plan feels like a betrayal of what made Voldemort so terrifying. He was not just a murderer, he was an obsessive scholar of the dark arts, willing to commit any atrocity for knowledge. His resurrection in Goblet of Fire involved grave robbing, blood sacrifice, and twisted alchemy. He would not have relied on a single, fragile, magical object. Delphi, who claims to be his heir, shows none of that dedication to research, none of that obsession with security. She is reduced to a simple plot device who says she will do anything for her father, but actually does only what the script demands for spectacle. It is this break between her stated fanaticism and her shallow plan that leaves the audience wondering if the writers ever really understood the magic they inherited from Rowling's books. Number 23. Why didn't she use dark magic? Fully, Delphi Diggory, the self-proclaimed heir of Voldemort, emerged in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child as a figure cloaked in an aura of darkness she never fully justified through her actions. The daughter of Lord Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange, she ought to have been a tempest of dark magic, a force to rival the terror her parents once sowed. Yet when scrutinizing her actual deeds, one struggles to reconcile the legend she claims with the reality she displays. Even during her most pivotal moments, such as her infiltration of Amos Diggory's household, Delphi relies more on deceit and ordinary persuasion than on the arsenal of deadly spells her lineage suggests she should command with effortless cruelty. Her plan to manipulate Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy, though cunning in its simplicity, reveals the absence of the elaborate magical sophistication one expects from a witch who bears the combined bloodlines of Voldemort and Bellatrix. The narrative positions Delphi as an extraordinarily gifted practitioner of the dark arts, yet, in practice, she never casts a single, unforgivable curse in front of the reader. When she finally seizes the Time Turner, her threats and attempts at intimidation appear curiously hollow, lacking the visceral dread that even a single demonstration of the Cruciatus curse would have inspired. She claims to have inherited the darkness of her father, but her actions fall short of substantiating such a claim. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, in the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, was seen gleefully torturing her victims, her madness underscored by real magical ferocity. In contrast, Delphi's menace never evolves beyond the conceptual. Consider the moment she reveals herself to Albus and Scorpius in the church in Godric's Hollow. She proclaims her identity and intention to restore Voldemort, yet the tools she uses are, ultimately, little more than a wand and a handful of binding spells. No advanced enchantments of irreversible damage, no fatal curses, no inferi, no magical constructs that could demonstrate her singular power. "I am the augury," she announces with theatrical gravity. Yet the text provides no evidence that she can summon even the simplest of Voldemort's signature curses, like the killing curse that once shaped the destiny of the wizarding world. Her entire scheme seems predicated on exploiting the naivety of two teenage boys rather than exercising any authentic magical supremacy. Her heritage implies not only raw power, but a familiarity with the most arcane rituals. Voldemort himself demonstrated an obsessive mastery of magic. He split his soul into Horcruxes, mastered wand lore, and experimented with resurrection rituals that left even seasoned Death Eaters aghast. Bellatrix, for her part, was infamous for her gleeful cruelty and her willingness to subject victims to unendurable pain. Yet Delphi never employs so much as a single blood ritual or dark incantation beyond what an average Death Eater might attempt. One cannot help but question whether the playwrights feared that any overt demonstration of her powers might have overshadowed the youthful protagonists, or perhaps they believed that an echo of darkness was enough to propel the story without granting her the weight of real, consequential magic. When Voldemort cornered Harry Potter in the graveyard at Little Hangleton, he did not merely threaten him, he raised the spirits of the dead to witness the moment, conjured fire, tortured Harry with the Cruciatus curse, and ultimately cast the killing curse with lethal determination. Delphi, in contrast, behaves as if the dark inheritance she so proudly claims is limited to the occasional stunning spell. She fails to summon the fiend fire that consumed the Room of Requirement, or the Morsmorder that branded the sky with the dark mark, or even the blood wards that protected Harry for years. The gap between her stated destiny and her actual abilities becomes increasingly obvious the longer she remains on stage. There is a curious absence of psychological manipulation worthy of her lineage. Voldemort was a master of psychological warfare. He haunted Harry's dreams, whispered lies that frayed his alliances, and infiltrated the Ministry of Magic through cunning and terror. Bellatrix wielded fear like a dagger, her every act a taunt meant to break her enemy's resolve. Delphi, however, only manages a single performance of false friendship with Albus and Scorpius, and even this ruse falls apart the moment she confesses her identity. There are no illusions, no mind-affecting curses, no cunning psychological traps. The most advanced deception she attempts is to feign innocence while pilfering the Time Turner, a theft that relies on opportunity rather than any demonstration of her magical gifts. One would expect Delphi to draw upon the same repository of obscure, forbidden spells that made her father almost invincible. Instead, she resembles a petty criminal whose ambitions outstrip her skill. Her plan to alter time by rescuing Cedric Diggory from death is a scheme so simplistic it borders on childish. It seems implausible that the heir of the most feared dark wizard of all time would place her hopes in a single Time Turner and a handful of improvised threats. The woman who could have been a second Voldemort becomes, in execution, a shadow who never quite steps into the darkness she claims as her birthright. Delphi's behavior in the climactic confrontation at Godric's Hollow underscores this paradox. When she is finally unmasked and faces Harry disguised as Voldemort, she does not respond with the panicked ferocity of a witch raised on her father's gospel of magical supremacy. She falls apart emotionally rather than unleashing any form of devastating counterattack. A witch schooled in the doctrines of Bellatrix Lestrange should have reacted with a frenzy of hexes and curses. Instead, her surrender feels anticlimactic, as though the story itself refuses to allow her the stature of a true dark heir. Even in her final defeat, she exhibits none of the lethal cunning that allowed Voldemort to elude capture for decades. The text makes clear she never considered an alternative plan, never prepared a fail-safe, never enchanted allies or hidden servants to protect her legacy. A wizard of Voldemort's caliber left Horcruxes across continents, corrupted influential figures, and sowed chaos wherever he set foot. Delphi leaves nothing behind but empty declarations and the failed theft of a Time Turner. Her story ends not in an inferno of black magic, but in a whimper of thwarted ambition. Readers who recall the chilling presence of Bellatrix at Malfoy Manor, where she tortured Hermione Granger and nearly murdered Griphook and Ollivander, find it difficult to believe that Bellatrix's daughter would not instinctively wield the same terrifying curses. The text in The Cursed Child offers no compelling reason for this absence of magical ferocity. Was she simply untrained, Did she lack the will to inflict pain? If so, her heritage becomes almost irrelevant, a set of hollow credentials never earned through action. Voldemort's legacy was built upon deeds, not speeches. He murdered countless innocents, shattered the power of the Ministry, and struck terror into the hearts of generations. Bellatrix delighted in cruelty so extreme it left scars on every soul she touched. Delphi's darkness is a narrative assertion, unsupported by her choices. She possesses no signature spell, no unique artifact of power, no masterstroke of black magic to distinguish her from any other ambitious villain. In the final analysis, her claim to be the augury is more theatrical costume than authentic identity. Number 24, why didn't auras find her? In the aftermath of the Second Wizarding War, the wizarding world of Britain was a landscape marked by grief, vigilance, and uncompromising scrutiny. Auras combed through every crevice of the country for remnants of Voldemort's regime. Files were reopened, trials were held, witnesses testified in hushed courtrooms where the air was heavy with old terror. Yet even as Hermione Granger, one of the brightest witches of her age and an ardent advocate for reform, ascended to lead the Ministry of Magic, a single figure remained inexplicably outside their notice: Delphi, the alleged daughter of Lord Voldemort himself. She was no shadow, drifting unseen across Europe, no faceless wanderer lost in Muggle cities. She lived among wizards in Britain, in the care of Euphemia Roll, whose very surname should have triggered alarm bells in the Aura office's most cautious minds. The wizarding world was not ignorant of the Roll name. Thorfinn Roll had fought for Voldemort, leaving behind a stain that even death could not erase. Euphemia herself was known to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. If Hermione Granger, whose entire career was built on eradicating blood supremacy, had ever seen that name on a housing registry or birth record linked to a child of unknown parentage, would she really have let it pass? The Ministry had launched a project to register and monitor known Death Eater families, ensuring their movements were tracked. They conducted interviews, cross-checked Hogwarts admission lists, and maintained tight surveillance on suspected sympathizers. Euphemia Roll, raising a girl with an untraceable lineage in such a climate, seems absurdly unlikely to have gone unnoticed. Consider the fact that Harry Potter himself had dedicated years to the Aura office. He was no absentee celebrity. He knew better than anyone the catastrophic danger posed by Voldemort's ideology surviving in any form. Harry had always been vigilant for signs of a new Dark Lord in the making. He spent countless hours investigating tips about surviving Death Eaters. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, he had refused to let Draco Malfoy's family off lightly until he was sure they posed no threat. If Harry was willing to distrust even a known classmate, is it truly believable he never once heard of a child raised by the Rolls? That he never asked questions when Delphi emerged with powerful magical skills, moving openly in wizarding society? Aura investigations in the post-war period were thorough to the point of paranoia. Even low-level snatchers were prosecuted and monitored. The Ministry issued public appeals for information about missing Death Eaters and their families. Witches and wizards who had been coerced into Voldemort's service were pressured to reveal names and addresses. Hogwarts students who had joined the Carrows regime were interrogated about collaborators. How could a child, the offspring of the most feared dark wizard in history, slip through such a net? The notion that Delphi was so perfectly hidden strains credulity. Euphemia Roll was not an untraceable ghost. She lived in the open, and Delphi herself was hardly a model of caution. It is especially perplexing given that the Ministry possessed magical means of detection far beyond Muggle methods. The trace, for example, was used to monitor underage wizardry. Although it didn't pinpoint individual spells to specific people in magical households, it remained a tool for surveillance. Children born to known Death Eaters would have been prime candidates for extra monitoring. Even if Euphemia claimed Delphi was her niece or ward, Any competent Auror would have demanded proof of parentage, given the Ministry's fears about Voldemort's legacy. Delphi's own magical power and interest in the dark arts should have set off alarms. Moreover, Hermione's leadership of the Ministry would have prioritized rooting out such threats. She was meticulous, with a lawyer's love of detail and a politician's sense of danger. She had lived through the war, she knew precisely what they had nearly lost. As Minister for Magic, she had the authority to order investigations into any suspicious wizarding household. She also had access to the Department of Mysteries, which had records and prophecies that might have hinted at the existence of Voldemort's heir. One would think that after so much bloodshed, the Ministry would have cross-referenced every old prophecy mentioning Voldemort, paying particular attention to any mention of children or heirs. It is instructive to remember how the Ministry treated Muggle-born registration under Voldemort's puppet regime. Every birth was supposed to be recorded, documented, verified. After the war, there was a push to undo that evil while maintaining enough rigor to prevent future infiltration by dark wizards. The Department of Magical Records, reorganized under Kingsley Shacklebolt and later Hermione, maintained meticulous lists of Hogwarts students, magical births, family trees, and citizenship records. Euphemia Rawle could not have conjured a birth certificate for Delphi out of thin air without raising suspicion. Even a lie about adoption would have been checked, if not immediately, then surely when the Ministry began investigating surviving Death Eater networks. Equally implausible is the notion that no one in the wizarding community noticed. British Wizarding Society is tiny. Everyone seems to know everyone else's business. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Slughorn's gossip about students' families shows the deep curiosity wizards have about bloodlines. Delphi's striking appearance, with her silver-blonde hair and dark eyes, would have drawn attention. Rumors about her power, her training, and her guardianship under a Rawle would have spread like fiend fire. It seems incredible that no teacher at Hogwarts, no neighbor, no fellow wizard ever sent an owl to the Auror office saying, "I think you should look into this girl." The magical community also had an established habit of tracking family vaults at Gringotts. Who paid for Delphi's upbringing? Even if Euphemia Rawle claimed the funds came from her own vault, Gringotts records would have revealed any unusual transactions. After the war, the Ministry worked closely with goblins to monitor for Death Eater assets being laundered. Euphemia could not have funded Delphi's education, clothing, wand, and living expenses indefinitely without someone asking questions about the source of her wealth, especially given her family's criminal past. Delphi's own magical education also raises questions. Hogwarts maintains detailed records. Students are sorted, assigned classes, and their exam scores are archived. If Delphi did not attend Hogwarts, that fact alone would have raised suspicion. The Ministry made it a priority to ensure all magical children were educated, precisely to avoid rogue dark wizards training in secret. If she was homeschooled, Euphemia would have had to register that with the Ministry, and inspections were not unheard of. And if she did attend Hogwarts, the staff would surely have noticed her skill, her dark arts inclinations, and her troubling lineage. The notion that Delphi was unknown to the Ministry also collapses when one considers her age. She was born before Voldemort's death in 1998, which means she would have been a child during the height of the Ministry's post-war investigations. Orphaned children of Death Eaters were rounded up, interviewed, and placed with vetted families. Hermione would have known of these cases intimately, pushing for compassion but also caution. The idea that no one even asked about Bellatrix Lestrange's offspring is remarkable, given that Bellatrix was known to be Voldemort's most fanatical follower. Bellatrix was as mad as her master and devoted to him beyond measure, as described in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Would no one have considered the possibility that such devotion could have produced a child? Even the Death Eaters themselves would have been liabilities for Delphi's secrecy. Many were caught and interrogated under veritaserum. The Ministry was relentless in pressing for names, hideouts, contacts. Some would have known about rumors of Voldemort's heir, or at least that Bellatrix had vanished for a suspicious interval before the Battle of Hogwarts. Bellatrix gave birth at Malfoy Manor, a location that was searched, watched, and scrutinized. How could no one have noticed a midwife, a servant, or a healer involved in the birth? The Malfoys themselves, under threat of Azkaban, might have been compelled to confess everything. And what of the Order of the Phoenix? Even after Voldemort's fall, its members remained vigilant. Kingsley Shacklebolt as minister maintained many of his old connections, relying on informants. Arthur and Molly Weasley had an ear in every corner of wizarding society. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were all personally invested in ensuring no new threat emerged. The idea that this trio, so scarred by the war, would fail to follow up on any lead about Voldemort's child seems to insult their intelligence and commitment. Finally, there is Delphi herself. She was not a subtle operator slipping silently through the world. She sought to change time, to bring back her father, to resurrect the very terror everyone had died to destroy. Her plan required resources, contacts, knowledge. She needed allies among surviving Death Eater sympathizers. Such activities create trails, letters, meetings, purchases of dark objects. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement had informants and sting operations for precisely this reason. How did Delphi recruit help without so much as a whisper reaching the Auror's ears? In truth, the idea that she remained hidden in plain sight defies the careful world-building Rowling provided about post-war Britain. A ministry traumatized by betrayal, infiltration, and mass murder would have erred on the side of obsessive caution. Files would have been checked and rechecked. Wards would have been cast. The wizarding population would have been only too eager to point fingers. Every element of the post-war society described in the Harry Potter canon screams that a child of Voldemort would have been the highest investigative priority in the entire country, and yet Delphi was missed. It remains one of the most glaring logical gaps in the world that J.K. Rowling so painstakingly built, leaving readers to wonder whether the threat she posed was truly credible or simply convenient for the sake of a belated sequel. Number 25. Why didn't she try to have heirs? Delphi Diggory emerged in the shadows of the wizarding world like a flickering candle, desperate to become a conflagration. She proclaimed herself the daughter of Lord Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange, a union as chilling as it was improbable. Yet in all her elaborate schemes to rewrite the past and reforge her father's dominion, Delphi revealed a striking omission that no student of magical history can ignore. She never once considered bearing children of her own to secure the Dark Lord's bloodline into future generations. If she so fiercely believed she was destined to restore the supremacy of Slytherin ideals and purge the wizarding world of weakness, why did she place all her ambition in a single, desperate plan? The logic dissolves when pressed. Even Voldemort, who considered ordinary family ties beneath him, took exhaustive measures to safeguard a legacy through his Horcruxes. Delphi, whose very identity was built upon the sanctity of lineage, failed to perform the simplest act of continuation. There is a peculiar irony in the way Delphi declared herself an heir to immortality, yet could not see the practicality of raising heirs in the most literal sense. In Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, she is presented as a woman of ferocious determination, willing to risk everything to meet her father and guide him to victory. She tells Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy, "I am the new past, I am the new future." This proclamation becomes strangely hollow once we reflect on her utter disinterest in forming a dynasty. One might expect that a witch who saw herself as a messianic figure would desire more than personal triumph. In every page of the script she clutches at the past with white-knuckled fervour, never stopping to wonder who might carry her cause forward if she were to fall. Consider Bellatrix Lestrange herself, a woman whose entire existence revolved around servitude to Voldemort. Bellatrix was fanatical enough to abandon all other loyalties, even her own family. And yet even Bellatrix, in the final months of the war, allowed herself to become pregnant, whether out of a twisted sense of devotion or a desire to produce a child who might one day serve as Voldemort's living legacy. If Bellatrix, so deranged by fanaticism, saw value in producing an heir, why would Delphi, raised to idolize her parents, fail to grasp the same logic? The oversight cannot be dismissed as a mere character quirk. It reflects a deeper inconsistency in the construction of her motivations. Throughout the play, Delphi proclaims her birthright as the justification for every crime she commits. She speaks with near religious reverence about fulfilling a prophecy that was never fully articulated. Her identity is inseparable from the idea that she is destined to resurrect Voldemort's power, yet she appears oblivious to the most reliable means of fulfilling this destiny, founding a family. One child, even an unremarkable one, could have become a powerful symbol for her cause. Wizards and witches who clung to the old prejudices might have rallied around such a figure, elevating Delphi's lineage into a rallying cry. In the eyes of those who never renounced Voldemort's ideals, the child of the Dark Lord's daughter could have inspired decades of allegiance. Instead, Delphi gambled everything on a single attempt to manipulate time. It is almost astonishing how little thought she gives to the future beyond her own lifetime. At one point, when she believes she has secured victory, she says, "I will rebirth the dark. I will bring my father back." The language is full of grandiose imagery, birth, rebirth, resurrection, but never once does she consider literal birth as a strategy. Her obsession with rewriting history blinds her to the more practical tactics any other dark wizard might have employed. Even Gellert Grindelwald understood the necessity of building a following that would endure beyond his own capture or death. Delphi seems to believe that if she could only correct one moment in time, her personal presence would be enough to cement 1,000 years of domination. The contradiction becomes clearer when compared to Voldemort's strategy. Tom Riddle detested his origins. He despised the notion of being a mere product of mortal parents. Yet even he recognized that to be remembered, one must plant seeds that outlast a single generation. His Horcruxes were the ultimate expression of this philosophy, fragmented shards of his soul designed to ensure that no matter what befell his physical body, his influence could never be entirely extinguished. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry he was determined to stave off the usual human encroachments of age and death. He set out to make himself immortal. Delphi, however, never demonstrates such pragmatism. She wants power, but only in the immediate sense. Her scheme is a reckless sprint, not a patient strategy. Her failure to contemplate descendants also suggests that she never developed the same contempt for ordinary mortality that defined her father. Voldemort did not merely wish to conquer the wizarding world, he wished to conquer death itself. That was the origin of every atrocity he committed. For Delphi, the goal seems curiously limited. She does not speak of immortality or 1,000-year reign. She does not envision a world where her bloodline continues to shape wizarding society in her absence. In this, she is a surprisingly shallow villain, all her fire and devotion expiring in a single generation. One cannot help but notice the lost dramatic potential in this omission. Imagine if the story had confronted Delphi's plan to establish a dynasty. Picture her revealing to Albus and Scorpius that she already carried a child, her father's grandchild, whose existence would forever bind the wizarding world to Voldemort's memory. The stakes would have become infinitely higher. Defeating Delphi would no longer be a matter of stopping a single witch, but preventing the rise of a new, dark family line. Such a revelation could have transformed the entire final act, adding a dimension of moral horror and tragic inevitability. Even the Death Eaters, scattered and disillusioned after Voldemort's fall, might have been compelled to rally around Delphi if she had presented them with a living heir. The Lestrange vault in Gringotts, already stuffed with artifacts of dark power, could have become a shrine for her child's ascendance. She might have inspired fanatics to rebuild their movement in secret, teaching her child the tenets of blood purity and domination. Instead, she stands alone, an echo with no plan for resonance. Delphi's apparent failure to consider any of this makes her monologues ring hollow. She insists she is the prophesied herald of Voldemort's return, yet she does not prepare the ground for that return in any meaningful way. She pursues only a single, desperate route to legitimacy: the manipulation of the time-turner. When this fails, she is left with nothing but her own delusions. For a character who so often speaks of destiny, she is remarkably short-sighted about the most basic mechanisms by which legacies endure. In the end, Delphi's motivations appear to be crafted more for theatrical convenience than psychological realism. She exists to provide a clear antagonist in a narrative that is otherwise preoccupied with fathers and sons. The play never asks whether she ever desired a family of her own, or whether she imagined herself raising children in her father's image. Perhaps the writers feared that such a subplot would complicate the story's focus on intergenerational trauma between Harry and Albus. But in omitting any consideration of Delphi's potential heirs, they created a character whose sense of purpose collapses under scrutiny. A witch so obsessed with her lineage should, by all logic, have been equally obsessed with its preservation. A single child could have embodied everything she professed to believe. Instead, she is content to vanish from history once her plan unravels. This is the most perplexing flaw in Delphi's character, a flaw that robs her of depth and undermines the plausibility of her mission. In a saga built on the struggle between the desire for immortality and the acceptance of mortality, Delphi should have been the ultimate symbol of a legacy unbroken by death, yet she never even attempts to conceive one. Number 26. Why didn't Voldemort kill the child at birth? He was the Dark Lord who trusted no one, not even his own most loyal followers, and whose entire philosophy was built around the conviction that attachments were a fatal flaw. Tom Riddle, who became Lord Voldemort, went so far as to rip apart his own soul to secure immortality, murdering without hesitation to create Horcruxes. He was the wizard who murdered Bertha Jorkins the moment she became a risk, and who killed Severus Snape purely to gain control of the Elder Wand. That same Voldemort, according to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, somehow permitted the existence of a daughter, Delphini, born to Bellatrix Lestrange. It is a jarring contradiction to imagine this man, whose idea of family was nothing but weakness, tolerating a living heir who might one day threaten him. Voldemort's fundamental trait was pathological suspicion. He could not abide potential rivals, real or imagined. When he discovered the prophecy about Harry Potter, he reacted with lethal preemption, killing James and Lily, attempting to kill the baby himself rather than risking any competitor. He even told his followers, "There is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it," a worldview that left no space for sentimentality, even toward blood. So when the Cursed Child asks readers to believe Voldemort left an infant alive who could potentially lay claim to his power, it asks them to ignore everything that made him who he was. We know from the books that Voldemort even distrusted his Horcruxes enough to hide them in disparate, well-guarded places. He placed the locket in a seaside cave protected by enchantments that required the donor to sacrifice blood. He hid the diadem in the Room of Requirement, a location that only appeared to those in desperate need. These choices reflect an obsession with secrecy and security. How could such a man ignore the even greater threat of a living heir? A Horcrux could be hidden. A child could grow up with thoughts of revenge, of conquest, of replacing him. One might try to argue he did not know about Delphini, that Bellatrix hid the pregnancy. Yet the canon gives us little reason to believe he was ever inattentive to the Lestranges, his most fervently loyal followers. Bellatrix worshipped him with fanatical devotion, so much so that she broke out of Azkaban for him and murdered for him without hesitation. She would have seen a pregnancy by him as a sacred event, something to be offered up for his glory. The idea she would keep such a secret is inconsistent with her character, who shrieked, "My lord," with worshipful adoration, even as she was defeated. If Voldemort did know about the child, then why would he keep it alive? The books are unrelenting in their depiction of his readiness to kill anyone he considered disposable or threatening. Think of Charity Burbage pleading on the table at Malfoy Manor before he lazily killed her mid-sentence. He didn't merely kill enemies, he killed servants who failed him. When Lucius Malfoy lost the prophecy in Order of the Phoenix, Voldemort's punishment was implied to be so horrific that Lucius's family lived in terror. Even loyal Pettigrew was strangled by his own silver hand for a moment of mercy. This is not the man to spare a newborn for sentimental reasons. There is also the issue of Voldemort's ideology about family itself. He was conceived under a love potion which he claimed made him incapable of love. Dumbledore observed, "He has never loved. He cannot love, not truly." Voldemort saw family ties as the very thing that weakened wizards like Harry and made them vulnerable to manipulation. He used Sirius to lure Harry to the Department of Mysteries, knowing Harry's affection would make him reckless. For Voldemort to deliberately allow a daughter to live, someone who might be used against him or who might imagine herself his successor, is entirely counter to his world view. It would be an error he would never commit. Even more telling is how he treated prophecy. When he heard Sybil Trelawney's partial prophecy about the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, he did not hesitate. He moved to kill Harry before the child could grow up. He did not wait to see what would happen. His entire life was ruled by eliminating threats at the root. It is impossible to imagine that if Voldemort had known of a child sired by him with even the tiniest chance of threatening his dominion, he would have spared her for even a second. Some might suggest Delphini was an insurance policy, a way for Voldemort to ensure his line continued. But the canonical Voldemort never showed the slightest interest in legacy. His chosen path was the destruction of his own soul. He didn't want children to inherit his empire. He wanted to be eternal himself. His fear of death was so consuming that he would rather exist as a wraith than allow mortality to win. The idea of breeding an heir like a mundane king is completely alien to the Voldemort we see in the books. Consider his reaction when he heard about Harry's sacrificial protection. Voldemort was enraged by what he considered Dumbledore's manipulation, by the idea of love conferring power. He was so infuriated that he lost strategic sense and attacked Harry in the Forbidden Forest himself. How can we square that furious disdain for love's supposed weakness with the notion of him fathering and protecting a child? The dissonance is staggering. His entire character arc is about rejecting human connection as worthless. The text of The Cursed Child simply asks readers to forget Voldemort's past, yet the books made a point of describing his suspicion even toward those closest to him. He did not have lieutenants, he had servants. When Barty Crouch Jr. returned to him after years in hiding, Voldemort still used Veritaserum to confirm his loyalty. He forced Wormtail into servitude with a magical hand that could strangle him at will. He did not share secrets, did not tolerate equals, did not even give Nagini affection beyond using her as an instrument of his will. That Voldemort would let his own child survive is absurd. Bellatrix herself is another obstacle to the Cursed Child's plot. She was obsessive in her loyalty, gleefully cruel, and utterly fanatical about Voldemort's power. Even if we imagine she wanted the child, she would have placed its fate in Voldemort's hands. The man who split his soul into 7, who demanded absolute obedience, would have dictated the child's fate, and his decision would not have been to let it live. He would see any living heir as a rival who might one day rally Death Eaters or other dark wizards with claims of lineage. Voldemort's view on mortality is also key here. He did not see death as natural or acceptable. He thought the idea of leaving anything behind was an admission of defeat. His Horcruxes were about anchoring himself permanently. As Dumbledore said, he was in such a hurry to mutilate his soul, he never paused to understand the full cost. This was not the mindset of someone who planned for a child to carry on his work. He wanted to rule forever. Any child was a threat to that goal. The idea of Delphini as some loyal daughter who idolizes her father also breaks the rules of Voldemort's manipulations. He did not inspire loyalty through affection, but through fear. His Death Eaters served him not because they loved him, but because they feared and revered his power. Even Bellatrix's love was twisted into slavish worship, something Voldemort exploited without reciprocating. The notion that he would trust a daughter or that she would somehow be guaranteed to serve his legacy faithfully is naive and inconsistent with everything he demonstrated.